on, guys? It's Mike again from BavhausTV, and today in front of us we have a N54 B30. This engine came out of a E90, and the reason it's out of the car is because we replaced the engine due to rod bearing failure. So we're going to show you guys how to dismantle the engine because we need it off this stand. We're going to utilize a couple pieces, but for the most part it's going to end up being garbage. We're going to show you guys what an engine looks like after rod bearing failure so you can identify the parts and how they're affected by rod bearing failure, as well as identifying parts within the engine just normally, and we'll tell you what needs to be replaced if you do have a rod bearing failure, if you choose to rebuild your engine, and then also what can be reused. So let's go ahead and start. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is remove the valve cover. It's held in by a number of E10 bolts. I think there's something like 24 of them all around. There's a long 10 millimeters in the center. We already have our coil packs out, obviously, as well as our fuel injectors. So at this point, we're ready to just lift this off and get it out of the way. So the first thing we're going to do is aim to remove the cylinder head, which is going to start off by us removing the camshafts and upper bearing ledges, which first requires us to remove the tension off the chain and the Vanos sprockets themselves. So before doing any of that, I'm going to go over to the right side of the engine, and there is a main chain tensioner there. I'm going to relieve some of that tension, and then we're going to go after these bolts up front that connect the Vanos sprockets to the camshafts themselves. All right, so right here on the passenger side of the engine, you have the main chain tensioner. It's a 27 millimeter, and with a 1/2" ratchet, it can come off by hand. You can take it out. This is what actually pushes on the chain guide rail and applies the tension to the chain itself. A little bit of oil will come out when you remove this, but this is what it looks like, and it's basically just like a plunger style piston that moves up and down. Afterwards, we can just put it back in, a couple threads just so it's in place. Next, we're going to remove the pickups off the sprockets, just held in with these two 16 millimeters. So we're going to take a 1/2" and 16 and break them free. They're on there pretty tight. All right, these bolts are one-time use. And this is what the pickups look like. And they should be the same for driver and passenger, if I recall correctly. Yeah, same part number, so you can mix these up. It doesn't make a difference. Okay, just gonna put those aside. All right, next we're gonna remove these two E8s that hold the upper timing guide to the bearing ledges. And then next I'm going to kind of waddle out these sprockets, let it just hang over the upper chain guide. And then this one says AUS or EX, which is exhaust in German, or AUS is exhaust in German. So you can't mix these up. Don't mix them up, but if you just read them, it should be fine. I would consider these not reusable, particularly just because they do need clean oil inside of them to operate properly. But that being said, I think you could reuse them after cleaning them and there shouldn't be any issue. And this is after a rod bearing failure is what I'm referring to. The pickups that were in here obviously can be reused. Timing, guides, and chains, I wouldn't recommend reusing. If you have an engine apart, might as well just replace that kind of stuff while you're here. All right, same thing on this side. Kind of press fit in, you want to waddle them out. All right, if you look down into here, you can see where the upper guide actually clips into the guide on the driver's side or the left of the engine. What you got to do is just take something lightly in between and kind of pull on guide as you unclip it. Will kind of pop out. There's a guide on both sides, so it can be a little tricky to get out. What you can also do is use a couple screwdrivers. Let's see how this works. I don't really care to be that ginger with these because this isn't going back together, but if yours is going back together, I would spend a little bit more time to make sure you take it apart right. As you can see, we kind of just went rough on it, and as long as it's not too rough, unclips fine, nothing's damaged in the process. So I'm just gonna put this chain kind of over something quick just so it kind of chills for a bit. Actually, in our case, I'm just gonna drop this down into the bottom of the engine. If you are working on your engine and just removing the cylinder head, I'd recommend that you tie it up to something outside the engine, maybe with some zip ties or something, just so it can't fall down. But since I'm just removing the head and for the sake of the video, we're just gonna let it go. All right, so next we're gonna remove the bearing ledges. And what I like to do is take an E-Torx, this is an E10, and start in the center and just break them all first. This will keep things from lifting too much and getting warped. Now that we did these two in the center, we're just going to do one here on the lower side, one here, or on the outside, one here on the inside, and then do the vice versa of that. So this one on the inside, this one on the outside. and keep that theme going just for the rest of the way. Doesn't matter which one you start with in terms of which bearing ledge, but this is the best way to make sure things don't get all warped. Again, these aren't being reused, but I still like to remove things the correct way. This one's got a middle one, so I'm just gonna do this one probably first. All right, so now that we have it all broken free, we're gonna start back at the center and fully remove the bolts. Just good practice. I'm gonna make it quick with an impact gun. See how it lifts up? You don't want it to do that at the wrong time when you're actually removing it. And that was pretty much the valves pushing back up with the resistance from the valve train itself and actually pushing up on that camshaft. So now we can remove the camshaft. And honestly, these camshafts don't look too scored. I was expecting after a rod bearing failure for these to not be reusable, but in this sense, I wouldn't be too horrified to see somebody reuse these. There's not too much wear on them. So I'll probably get you a close up on that in a second. Overall, these look really nice. I'm gonna put them back down just for a second. We're gonna move the upper ledge off like that, and inspect the journals here, which honestly, again, they look pretty good. I'm not too horrified by this. So these camshafts and these ledges, I'd say you could reuse. If you have an engine that you continue driving after a rod bearing failure, then I would say definitely look at these, and there's a large chance that you shouldn't be reusing any of this valve train stuff. But in our case, if you wanted to rebuild this engine, I'd feel comfortable with that being reused. All right, so the next thing we're gonna do is remove this one. Kind of the same thing, just missing one extra bolt. Break it free. I stopped right after that kind of like initial crack. If you wanna do a couple passes of this, it can also be a good idea. So we'll show you what that looks like in a second. Again, the first one we kind of took apart a little quicker, but with this one we can spend some extra time. All right, so we can do one more pass. And now they're fully loose. All right, so now that these are fully loose, we can go with our impact and fully remove it. Again, if you're rebuilding this engine, using hand tools is definitely your best bet. Once this is fully loosened, you can go and use an impact. This is kind of overkill with it being air, and electric should do fine. I'm just using it to expedite the process. So again, these camshafts, the lobes look nice. I mean, there's some scratches, but nothing that you wouldn't expect from an engine that has nearly 100,000 miles on it. This was a pretty premature failure. I think this engine only had like 80,000 on it, but it was because of a MOSFET failure with an MSD80 causing the engine to overfuel, so it was one of those situations. So you can see the journals have a little bit more scratching, but it's super, super fine scratching. And again, I don't think even like the hook ring issue looks good on these. I don't think it'd be a bad thing to reuse both of these camshafts and all of the bearing ledges. Up here, the journals, again, just some very minor scratching. If you want to be really anal, you could, purchase these again, but rebuilding an entire engine on a budget, these things start to add up. So I wouldn't be opposed to seeing somebody reuse these if they would like to. Next, let's remove the whole thing. All right, so the next thing we're gonna do is remove the rocker rollers as well as the lifters themselves. So what commonly can happen when you go and take those bearing ledges off is one of these rocker rollers can kind of get kicked off. Make sure that if you're reassembling that these are sitting properly on the valve spring. Anyways, you kind of just grab the rocker roller and give it a gentle lift and it can come out. If it's not coming out easy, the lifter might kind of bind up. You just give it like a little wiggle and it'll come out. I have seen these break inside the cylinder heads before, so just be very careful. So we're just gonna pull them all out. They're just held in by a little spring clip. They pop out pretty easy. So some may fall out. Just be careful. Make sure you're pulling all the pieces out properly. I'm gonna get Justin to show you guys what the rollers look like, because again, for a rod bearing failure, this engine actually looks pretty good. So normally there'll be scoring on the rollers. In this case, there isn't. So get a quick shot of those. All right, so next we're gonna remove this side. Oh, see, that one's got a little bit of resistance. And I wonder if it's because I'm standing here trying to lift those out. So let me go to the other side and see if just by pulling, come out a little easier. All right, so I'm gonna try from this side, and I can see it kind of wiggling, but it seems like it's not coming out. I can move the inner one too, but the one that's actually in the cylinder head seems to be stuck in pretty good. So what I'll probably try to do here is put a rag over, grab it with a vice grip, and give it a pull, and then it comes out. And these, like I said, kind of don't really have too much wear on them. They do kind of get a little pricey too. So it seems like everything, at least in the valve train on the top, seems all right. So I think this all could be reused when rebuilding an engine. I know some of you might disagree with me, and I wouldn't really try to do anything too crazy with this engine with its history. But that being said, if you wanted to rebuild it and take it from there, see where things are at, maybe some Blackstone oil reports as you break it in, and as long as everything turns out fine, I don't think that a lot of this engine needs to be condemned. Again, that might not always be the case with all of these, but we have definitely taken apart some of these engines after rod bearing failures where they're just completely trashed. This is not one of them. So for some reason, it seems like this side's getting stuck a lot more. And I have noticed that being a thing with that one side. The lifters get stuck in a little bit more for some reason. You definitely want to make sure these lifters come out right, because if you get them stuck inside and you can't get them out, pretty much deems the entire cylinder head useless. So, cool. At this point, we're gonna go and try to start beating out these valve springs. Show you how we're gonna do it. It's gonna be a little grotesque. You should definitely buy the tool to do this properly. In our case, we don't really care. We just want the cylinder head. All right, so now to get the valve springs out, we have to obviously get the keepers out. So what I like to do is take a 13mm socket with an extension. I'm gonna kind of hold it in place, center it up on the top of the valve spring, and give it a good hit. This is a 17 now. There we go. Okay, so the part about this that kind of sucks is whenever you do this, you gotta go recover the keepers. So here's your valve spring with the top. Everything looks fine. Again, kind of up to you if you want to reuse this stuff. You did just, in this case, wail on it with a hammer, but I don't really think it really bends too much. But if you're building like a spec engine, I would definitely at least get the new tops of the springs, those pieces right there. All right, so we're just gonna go with the pliers and get our keepers. There's 2 halves to every keeper. And normally they will just fall down. All right, so that's one. We're just gonna keep this process going. Again, I like to kind of base my arm on the block so this doesn't bounce up too much, or on the cylinder head, sorry. Make sure if you're hitting it that you're not hitting this into the top of the cylinder head deck. And if you get a good hit on that, I really do think it is safe. And see, the keepers stay right up top. So although this may not be the best method, this is the old school method. And this is the part I was saying that you can replace if you'd like to, and that's just the little tops of the springs, the retainers. This is just a faster method since we're just disassembling. But if you wanted to get these out properly, just get the tool that bolts onto here where the bearing ledges go, and you'll be able to get them out much easier, or much safer rather. Okay, third one. That one freaking exploded. But keepers. Oh, the valve came up. Okay. Sometimes just the oil helps get them out. So that one went right here. Cool. Next one. Lost one keeper. That's one. And the second one is just right down here. All right, so now we're just gonna do the same thing for the rest of these. All right, next we're gonna go do the same thing on the other side. All right, once you've recovered all of your keepers, what I like to do is actually take my valves and I'll put them down in towards the cylinders. And this is just so when we lift the cylinder head off, they don't like all come falling onto the ground. Some of them will already kind of be inside the engine. See, like that, you can hear them kind of fall. So these, the pistons are up, so obviously they're gonna interfere on those. And then whatever's left, don't force it, just we'll deal with them when we get there. So the next thing I'm gonna do is, in our case, we wanna save the cylinder head to be reused. So I'm just gonna use one of my flapper discs and clean up the deck. This is nothing that you guys have to do, but we'll probably just roll the camera so you guys can see what we do. This kind of surface can be resurfaced at the machine shop, but it's kind of senseless for them to do when you could just clean it up a little bit by hand. The head will go to the machine shop to be decked before it's reused on the other side, but for now, we're just gonna do this side before we go to remove the head itself. Not only did someone use RTV to seal this valve cover in the past, but they also used the screwdriver to pry it off, and there's just marring everywhere. So we're just gonna clean that up. All right, so on the front of the block, you have an E8. This is the plug to get access to the upper timing chain tensioner bolt and alignment dowel. I forgot my long 1/4" T40 is broken, so we're just gonna have to use like Allen wrench styles, and then I'm probably gonna put like a extension on it. Something like this could work. All right, there we go. And now I can just put it through this way and get it out, but yeah, it's a T40. This is gonna give you access to one of 3 bolts that hold down the cylinder head up here. There's actually one outside of the engine too that holds down the head, or outside of the inside of the engine. Okay. So you have one right here, one right here, one right here, and one out here. So there's these 4 E12 bolts. We're gonna start just by cracking them all free. All right, and then once you got them all free, we're just gonna use the gun and get them out. So the screwdriver gouges are actually pretty deep, so we're probably gonna try to get the machine shop to redeck the top here, just so it's nice and smooth before we reuse this cylinder head. But these are what the bolts look like. You're gonna need probably a magnet to grab that lowest one. Let me see if some pliers will work. Yep, needle nose will work. It's a little stubby one. All right, so now that you got that out of the way, we have one more thing that we're gonna do. Actually, 2 more things. I'm gonna get these cam sensors off of the engine, and I'm gonna remove the spark plugs. Pretty much as any accessory, while it's on here, it's just gonna be the easiest time to get it out. So there's a couple exhaust studs left behind. I'm gonna get those off, and then we can start actually removing the cylinder head bolts and take the head off. Okay, cam sensors are just E8s. We already had our Van solenoids out too, so you would need to remove those before you remove that upper timing cover, or other upper timing chain guide, because it goes through that, so we forgot to mention that earlier. And it looks like we already took our oil filter housing off on this, as well as our coolant temp sensor. All right, I'm gonna fully remove the chain guide on this side. So all this is gone. I just got a couple more studs to remove, and I think we're ready to go. All right, there's like 4 exhaust studs left behind, so I'm just getting those out quick. And there's gaskets as well for the old turbos, or the exhaust manifolds. All right, cool. So now we're gonna start breaking free the actual cylinder head bolts. These are one-time use bolts, and they are T60s. All right, so you have 4 T50s on the outside edges, and then the rest of these are T60s. So you're gonna start from the center. There's an odd number so that the center is actually easily identified. So that's this one, and then you're gonna do these, and then finish up with those T50s on the outside. I'll show you what we mean now, but it's similar to what we did when we removed the camshafts. So you're just gonna break free one of the center ones. It requires a decent amount of force, and of course my engine stand wants to move. And then now that you did that one in the center, we're gonna move and do a crisscross pattern. And you wanna make sure they spring free. Okay, now this one. Now this one. This one next. Now this one. Next, this one, and this one. All right, and then once you have all the center ones loose, just go make sure that they are all entirely loose. All right, now we're gonna do the 4 outer ones. These are the T50s, and I'm gonna do this at 1/2 inch. I'm just gonna put a little 3/8 to 1/2 inch step down on here, and we'll start with this one in the back corner. Okay, and this one, and this one. You can hear the head lifting. Okay, last one. And the head just lifted. So now we can go back and remove all of our bolts. And at this point, it doesn't really matter. I'm gonna start with the 50s. They look like. So these are the T50s. And then now you're gonna wanna recover these washers. These are the ones for the corners. There's only 4 of them. They're very specific. You can't mix the corner ones with the center ones. These are smaller. So once you have those, this is what they look like. Okay, now I'm just gonna start from the center just for force of habit. Let me get these out. This one came out with the washer. All right, well, aside from this one, which we'll just put right here, these are what bigger bolts look like. These are the T60s. All right, now we're just gonna remove the remaining washers, and this is just done with a magnet. All right, and that's what these look like. Okay, so now we're ready to actually lift the cylinder head off the block. I'm just gonna use a rubber mallet, and we're gonna kind of lightly hit some of these outer corners, like that. There's alignment dowels that kind of need to be broken free. So just find a couple good spots. A rubber mallet is definitely the best bet here. All right, what I'm gonna do is like take a hugging position, grab the head, and lift. Looks like I'm caught on something in the back. All right. You can hear the valves falling. So we're gonna lift it off, and I'm gonna move the head down to the ground for a second, get the rest of the valves out. And then now we have the rest of our valves, which we can gently remove. Clearly see which ones are the exhaust and which ones are the intake by the amount of carbon on them. It looks like that one even has walnuts, probably just from tapping on it so much. That's 4 of those. That's 4 of these. That's already got 4, that's already got 4. Got 2 over here. And 4 in the back. So this is what the cylinder head looks like outside of the car. It's pretty much empty. Still a couple things we can remove, but overall, this is an N54 cylinder head, pretty bare. All right, so before moving on, I'm gonna quickly grab this head gasket. I'm gonna try to sneak it out. Let me pull that chain through. Okay, like that. Put that aside. Obviously, that's not gonna be reused. So a couple things I'm noticing on this cylinder 1 piston, there's a bunch of pitting marks on both sides, as well as what looks to be like slightly washed out. If you look at cylinder 2, you'll notice that it's nice and burnt next to it, and obviously doesn't have that weird pitting. So I'm not sure what happened there, but it's not really related to why the engine's condemned, but interesting to find. All right, so now we put some pig mats on the floor because we're gonna be losing some fluids here, and we're gonna turn the motor over, let it kind of leak out. Mostly coolant, and there comes the oil. All right, I'm gonna pull those pig mats out completely. And then we can start working on the bottom side of this engine. So we're just removing the oil pan. This engine actually wasn't an X-Drive, but the donor engine was a rear-wheel drive car. So that's why this pan's on here, because we needed to take the oil pickup and the pan from this engine and put it in that engine and vice versa. So that's why it's only held in with 2 bolts. Obviously there's a lot more bolts to get these done, but I get that. So now we're gonna actually see what happened, because from the top end it didn't look too bad, but I know from down here, this thing had some crazy rod knock. Okay, pop this pan off. So you can see I already took the oil pickup tube out of there. Still have the deflection plate and the pump to remove. All right, next thing we're gonna do is remove the deflection plate. It's held in with a bunch of one-time use aluminum E10 Torx bolts. If you have your oil pickup tube here, which you should, obviously remove that. It's just gonna be either 1 or 2 of these that are just a little longer, and then you just kind of pull it out of the pump. All right, so we can set that aside. Normally you wouldn't want to reuse an oil pump that was in an engine that spun a rod bearing. So obviously I can't see inside of this. So I think we're just gonna condemn this and pretty much say it's useless at this point or shouldn't be reused. If you want to take it apart, clean it, put it back together, that might be doable. I'm not sure, I wouldn't recommend it. But anyways, I'm gonna do the oil pump now. I'm just gonna take these two E10s off the front here as well. These are just the chain module to the pump. Okay, next we're gonna remove this bolt right here that connects the sprocket to the pump. All right, this is gonna be done by taking the T45 and we're gonna move, so we're upside down, so to move the motor over, it's gonna go this way. And then we're gonna put a dowel in like that. Right. And then I'm gonna go to loosen. Okay. That bolt can come out. And if the dowel gets stuck, you can just move it back. You should be able to pull it out like that. All right, now we can walk the chain sprocket off of the front of the oil pump with the screwdriver. Like that. And we can remove the pump now. And it should be 3 E12s to get them out. Okay, and you can kind of waddle the pump back and forth. It's on some dowels. And you're gonna get it out this way. So it didn't take long for us to figure out which bearing had the rod bearing failure. And even though the rest of the valve train looks good, the rotating assembly did show a sign immediately of cylinder 1 having that blown bearing. So not sure if this piston, yeah, look at how much I can move this already. And that's what causes rod knock. This is supposed to be a nice tight tolerance and this thing can knock in a sense. Like I can physically make that thing make noise. This amount of play is definitely what made this not in spec anymore. So honestly, this engine could be rebuilt and I don't think that there would have to be too much. Obviously we're gonna have to take the crankshaft out and some people like to machine them. I would say replace it at this point. The thing about the crankshafts is they should really be kept along with the block that they came in. So a lot of people don't wanna take like a crankshaft from this engine and put it in a different engine. So that's why you'll see a lot of these engines get condemned. Normally, if you buy a block, you want to buy it with this bed plate because it actually is the upper crankshaft bearing ledges. We'll show you that in a minute. But in this case, if it's going to be machined anyways, it really doesn't matter too much in the long run. So just because of the failure, the crankshaft to me at least is pretty much dead. And then that being said, I would say the engine is not really desirable to rebuild on just because you don't have that original spec'd out clearance in the crankshaft itself. So of course, if you're doing like a completely built engine, that really doesn't matter anymore, but it's always good to start with a matching pair of the block itself along with the bed plate and the crankshaft. All right, that being said, I think we're gonna take some of the accessories and stuff off the front of the engine, like the crank pulley and these pulleys, tensioners and stuff. And then we're gonna remove the bearing caps, take the pistons out, and then we can remove the bed plate as well as the main bearings and then actually get the crankshaft out. So let's get to that. All right, so I'm just gonna start with cylinders 3 and 4. We're just gonna remove the old rod bearing bolts. I'm so used to doing rod bearings that I just refer to it as old rod bearing bolts, like we're putting new ones in. But yeah, we're just gonna take these caps off and see what kind of damage is done on the rest of the rod bearings. All right. When I do this, hopefully the pistons don't just fall. Yeah, so these rod bearings were never done, you can tell because they are the old style bolts. So if this was just spun and turned off, most of the engine should be salvageable, but normally what happens is you get damage kind of going through the rest of the engine. Let me get a clean rag quick so we can really clean things up and see what's going on. All right, so we're starting to see some hot spotting here and some clear damage, but this was also a full bolt-on car and it did have some problems over the time that it was running with some bolt-on mods. So that's not completely the worst thing in the world. I have seen them like that. I'm gonna give this to Justin and have him show you because I'm assuming that that's what most of them are gonna look like. Meanwhile, I'm gonna just pop the piston out and bring it down through the bottom. We're gonna take it out through the cylinder head side. Use the back of my ratchet. All right, I'm actually gonna leave it in place for now, unless I can get something to kind of pop it out. See if a pry bar can go down there without hitting anything. We do have oilers down there, and that's what I'm trying to avoid hitting. Unless, can you put your hands under here? I'm gonna pop it out. You can grab this, grab it with a rag. All right, I'm just gonna give it a. Okay. All right, So here we have piston for cylinder 3, and just looking at the top, that bearing just popped out, but that's probably from me wheeling on it. Oh, you know what? This bearing like doesn't fit in there great. All right, so you can see that copper color in the bearing. That's completely like worn through. This thing doesn't even want to sit in. The tang's kind of just like useless. So this was about to spin this bearing for sure. This one was on its way out. So bearings are definitely no good. The pistons can still be reused, as well as the rods. All the rods except for cylinder 1 at this time could be reused, but let's see if we spun any more bearings than just the one. Usually it's just the one, but who knows. All right, moving on, we're gonna do cylinder 4 now. See if it's just as bad, not as bad, worse. Okay, this one's not looking too bad. Yeah, that one looks normal. Pretty normal for 100,000 mile wear. Put that there. Journal looks pretty good. Let's see what that lower one looks like. And again, I'm just wailing on the bearing, so that's all that's gonna be affected by me hammering. So aside from the hammering, this one does look pretty worn in, but again, not the worst. It's pretty bad though. Take this piston and rod and put it aside. Now we're gonna rotate the motor over a little bit and get these last rods out. So it would seem that the engine is actually completely stuck. I think that rod bearing being in that, I think it's seized. Yeah, I think it's not gonna spin. So that's interesting, I wasn't expecting that. I think what we're gonna have to do is find a way to kind of get things loosened up down there from where we're at. So I'm gonna get an extension and maybe we can get some of these broken free. I'm gonna go for cylinder 1 and 6 next, just so I can get the damaged one out. Woo, that was a lot harder than it should have been. I don't know why. Okay, let's see if it'll spin now. Any direction? I have absolutely no idea why this thing doesn't want to spin at all. Right, so large pull, we were able to finally get the motor to move. It's pretty seized up, so it's kind of how we had to do it, but I'm pretty sure it's just related to the fact that the front bearing is pretty bad. So I can get it out now. That was not the one I did, and it was pretty loose too. Didn't have that like rip that they usually have. All right, let's check it out. What the hell happened here? Oh, that's actually like friction welded to the crankshaft itself. Like this is like part of the crank now.
I've never seen that before.
Yeah, I've never seen that either. That's crazy. All right. Oh, they friction welded themselves together. There it is. So this one spun, but never actually fully fell apart. Yeah, the crank is still smoked. Well, it's not gonna make it out, but yeah, you can see the grooves down here, unfortunately. Crazy, pick that up, keep that piece. Let's get the other half. I'm interested to see what the piston side looks like. All right, so here's the other side of the rod with the piston, and that guy doesn't even want to come out. It's actually, this is where it got stuck, just like that. Well, that's probably why the engine didn't want to turn. It's literally like cracked in the rod. You can see the rod actually like welded to the bearing here. This is it spun out, so basically the tang got loose, the bearing went up, and then from spinning so much, it actually heat welded and got stuck in this final position. So once that thing just started knocking, it was just loose hitting this thing, but look at how it's physically one piece now in this position. This is crazy. And there's this huge crack here. I don't know from what, probably just from pieces getting stuck there and then unbinding, but I've never seen anything like this. Cylinder 6 now. Not too shabby, we can live with that. And then now, this one stayed with the crankshaft. Let's see what that's about in a second. Let's get this piston out. Any lock or no? All right, I'm gonna try to get this bearing back on. All right, I got the bearing back on. Stay away from the oiler. Have a look. All right, pretty heavily worn, but not awful. Put that there. I'm still surprised by how bad cylinder 3 is, just randomly. It's not entirely random because it was a spun engine. It's weird how that one just has so much damage comparatively. And again, this was a low mileage engine, but I think it did run starved. 2 more cylinders. Let's see how much the motor turns now. Not still choked up. I don't know what's doing that. Maybe there's some damage actually done to the crankshaft main bearings. Okay, last 2. So this is the one right next to it, and it doesn't look that bad. What's strange is this engine just kind of one day just spun a rod bearing. There was plenty of clean oil in it, had really good maintenance after the initial issues with the MOSFETs. But after that, you know, it got an MSD81, it got all 6 injectors upgraded to the Index 12. It really didn't have any indicators that this would happen, which is kind of nerve-wracking if you think about it, because if this thing did have all the things that it needed to prevent this, why did it still happen? And it could just be because it was kind of slowly happening for a long time and it just finally decided to happen. Kind of goes against most things that I understand, that like a relatively healthy engine would just have this happen. So now this is why we kind of just do N54 rod bearings as a preventative maintenance measure. This one's got some gouges in it, but still not as bad as that one. So one more, it's for cylinder 5. All right, last one. Gotta put brakes on these freaking stands. One Harbor Freight, what are you doing? And again, not that bad. Let you guys see all these in detail after the fact. Wanna go grab that one? Overall, not what you'd expect from an engine with that spun of a bearing up front. So this time, get all this out of here and then check out what's going on with our main bearings. So we got some stuff to take off still. I'm probably just gonna leave this on, we'll take it off after. I just have 2 bolts holding it in place because I thought I was gonna use my timing tools to do this disassembly, but then I decided not to. And with the timing tools, you need the flywheel on to hold the dowel in place. It's kind of stupid and it makes it really inconvenient because if you're doing any timing stuff, it's on a stand and this is here, but then that's partly what makes it difficult to turn the crank pulley, first of all, because it interferes with the hardware. And then second of all, if you go to remove a crankshaft, this has to come out with it. I don't think that was really thought out, but I digress. Now we're gonna remove the main bearings and the lower bed plate. All right, so we're gonna take some stuff off so that we can get to the main bearings, remove the bed plate and then the crankshaft. All right, so next I'm just gonna remove all these pulleys. These are T50s. We're just gonna start with this one on the bottom, and this one, and then the tensioner. All right. All right, once you get that out of the way, we can take the cover off of the vacuum pump and actually get it off the back of the engine. All right, so this can be a bit of a pain in the ass to get off. I don't really like using like a screwdriver or anything because it might mar it up, but I think what we're gonna do is kind of hit it on one side and it should pop it out on the other side. It might be easier to bend it than it is to actually try to pry it out. Or just get inside it. Cool. And then inside there's a chain sprocket with a gear, and we have to put a dowel into that to counter hold this, and then we can get that gear off of this pulley. All right, T55, I'm just gonna use an impact gun. I kind of just released all this. There is a place where you can actually get to it and put a dowel through it, but it's not like easily available at the moment to reach that spot. So next I'm gonna remove the crank pulley. All right, so now we're just gonna use an E10, break free the crank pulley bolts, 6 of them. All right, some of this hardware that can be replaced. That's the best place to pry and take the harmonic balancer crank pulley off. All right, next I'm gonna remove this bracket, kind of in the way. Just holds the AC line in place. Okay. All right, so next we're going to remove these 2 H8 plugs here. This is just to remove the rest of the chain guides. So this one looks like it's gonna be 10 millimeter. Get that out. All right, so next we're going to remove this. I'm just using a 5/8 or something socket just because I don't have a skinny enough E10, but it pretty much does the exact same thing. All right, cool. I'm gonna pop this crank bolt out. All right, so this is where having the flywheel still on actually benefits you. I was able to go and lock the crankshaft in place because my impact gun is not removing the front crank bolt, so I have to use a big breaker bar. right. Okay, and at this point, we can go and remove it the rest of the way by hand. There you go. All right, T45 over here is gonna remove this last timing alignment. All right, so just like that. There's our lower guide. So then we can push the crank hub through with the oil pump module. So that's that. Here's our crank hub. This is just compression fit for the front of the crankshaft with the torque of that front bolt that we had such a pain of a time removing. And then what just fell to the floor was the chain itself along with the chain gear sprocket. So this is what actually sits in compression with the crank hub. So something like this, and then drives the train, sits inside the crankshaft, and spins. So get all that out of the way. All right, we're gonna start removing the bed plate and the crankshaft. And the way we're gonna do this is by starting with these 4 E14s. Okay, and next we're gonna do these E12s. Next, I'm going to turn the motor over one more time just to let all these pockets of oil drain out, just so they don't end up splying all over the place when I impact them. All right, next we're gonna remove all of these on the inside, and I'm gonna just do these in a crisscross pattern. These are the bed plate ones. And these are also E14. These are all aluminum screws, so don't go trying to get them out with a magnet, because it's not how that works. And I believe at the back, there's gonna be 2 more, yeah, there's gonna be 2 more of these E14s that we can remove. All right, we're gonna start in the center. Do the same thing. We're just breaking free. Then we're gonna move out. Gonna do this whole bearing. So we crisscross side to side, but you don't actually like crisscross bolt when you remove these. That's not gonna work. All right, this one you need to use like a skinny socket or a 3/8. Just to fit in between the bed plate. Okay. All right, so the crank should be completely free now. What we're gonna do before we actually take the bed plate off and screw around with that, I just wanna get the vacuum pump out. So I think it's got T30s, 3 of them. So let's get those out quick. 3 T30s. Pretty tight. All right, should be able to just go behind now and get this pump out. And there you go. All right, I'm gonna have Justin hold the front of the motor up now. I'm gonna take these 2 bolts out of the engine stand. You can see it's already kind of starting to dip down. I think what we're gonna actually have to do is take the whole thing off the stand, and then we're gonna put it on the ground, just because the dowels aren't gonna be able to come out fully from what I can tell. Actually, we're all right. It's not the best idea, but let's get this all finished up. All right, so we're just gonna have Justin there kind of holding it, even though it seems to be all right. So I'm gonna get these crank bolts out now. Gotta just switch real quick. Grab all the bolts out. Okay. And now I'm gonna try to get the bed plate off. It is gonna be sealed on, so you might have to pry in a couple spots, but there's clear places where you can go and stick a screwdriver underneath and it'll give you the ability to lift. Just grab on the block, not the bed plate. So it looks like our bed plate is, for the most part, released. All right, so Justin's gonna hold the block. I'm gonna get the bed plate up, sneak past the flywheel, and then out this way. All right, so now I'm just gonna lift the crankshaft out because I don't wanna take this off the engine stand. So we have 2 bolts holding the flywheel to the back of the crank. I'm gonna lift it up, Justin's gonna whack those 2 off, and then we can get it out of here. Let's do the first one. Okay, and I can remove the crank. So we're gonna have to leave it there. This is the whole reason why I was saying the flywheel is just a pain to have on these engines when you work on them, because they just sit there. It's our front main seal, can go in the garbage. So we're gonna have to wait to take that off. All right, anyways, here's our main bearings, and for the most part, pretty worn. They're not awful, but you can definitely see that there was something going on in this engine. But overall, I think aside from that rod bearing failure, they wouldn't have had really any issues. I'm gonna remove these oil squirters. We can take the rod bearings out of this engine block, because we're gonna replace these anyways when we machine this block to reuse it. Same thing with the girdle we just removed. The middle one looks like this. Alright, so just a couple more things. We have that, and then I have a crank position sensor left. And then I think for the most part after that, this thing is ready for the machine shop. Alright, so these are H6s. We're just gonna pop them free, and the rest of the way they can be removed by hand. These are what actually lubricate the pistons as they slide up and down the cylinder. Alright, so that's the squirters. And I believe the last thing I'm going to do is take off that crank position sensor, which is over here and is held in with an E8. So I'm just going to bag up these squirters, and then we can pull this off the stand and put it aside. Alright, so I'm just going to take that E8 out so we can get this crank position sensor out of here, and then get this thing off of there, finally. Alright, so now we have to remove the engine off the stand, which I think the best way to do this is actually slide it out. Okay. Alright, let's move it over here. Just set it down on the side. And now we're gonna remove. Alright. So that's how you take apart an N54. This is what it looks like. It's just a bare block. I think a lot of this is actually reusable. The cylinder walls don't look scored. They look nice and even in terms of the hash marks, even cylinder one. So I think the spun bearing was luckily contained mostly to the cylinder one. Rod bearing kind of maybe could have gotten the oil a little bit, but it wasn't enough to really mess with the valve train too much, or damage anything other than just like the bearings. So main bearings, we'll show you what they look like. They're worn, but they're not too bad. Obviously, they'd be replaced if you're going to replace some of the internals inside this engine, but I definitely think that the majority of the stuff can be reused, which is really cool. It doesn't happen often. So, as always, thanks for watching BavhausTV. Hope we helped.